What's up, everybody? I'm Mike Golick Jr., former Notre Dame college offensive lineman, current TNT college football analyst covering the Big 12 this season. Welcome to the Bleacher, BR Weekly College Football Show. And an exciting one here. Week 2, listen, had a tall order to try and overcome with what we saw, the Week 1 slate, 3 top 10 matchups, ranked-on-ranked matchups all over the place. We know on paper the Week 2 slate maybe didn't look as appetizing, but I assure you still delivered like an excellent main course. So excited to take you through all of that right now. Again, you can check us out on the Bleacher Report app as always. You can certainly check us out on YouTube as well for this each and every week here, Mondays at 5 o'clock Eastern. We're going to take you through all the action from the weekend that was. We want to hear from you in the chat. As always, you can hit us up there. Our producer will get some questions in front of me. I'll be looking in the chat on YouTube. That Red Sox fan already said we're 1 minute late. I understand. That's a me problem, not a Bleacher Report problem. I'm going to do my best to be on time for you because we're on Coughlin time around here. So thanks for keeping us honest here. And there's no other place to really start this show other than with what we saw from the University of Florida this weekend. An absolutely unforgivable loss at the hands of USF, who, oh, by the way, now climbing up to number 18 in the polls after that 18-16 win over Florida in a game that is going to reignite all of the Billy Napier hot seat talk from last season. And listen, I never want anyone to lose their jobs. It's just not how I'm wired. As a former player, I saw what those coaches put into it. You've seen how much this matters to Billy Napier. Seems like a good dude. So you hope that they can right the ship. But after the end of last season, where they were able to pull themselves out of that skid, this isn't going to inspire a lot of confidence. Billy Napier said today he's going to remain the play caller going forward. And that's quite honestly one of the issues that you saw come out of this game. Now, we saw a lot of different instances in this that are going to point back to coaching, right? You look at 11 penalties for 103 yards, including a pass interference penalty and a player being ejected for spitting. Apparently, we're living in Jalen Carter's America now after the ejection in Thursday Night Football to open the NFL season. I learned it by watching you moment as we see the ejection there for defensive lineman Brendan Bett, who was flagged and ejected for spitting at his opponent on that final drive. That's always going to be kind of the thing dumped in the lap of coaches when we talk about, you're either coaching it or allowing it to happen, the discipline of your football team, a reflection of the coaches because we don't get to see that. But on the other side, there were some play calling moments that are really going to be hard for fans to stomach. And I look in the waning moments of this game. Let's set up the situation. 2:52 left in the fourth quarter. It's 1st and 10. Florida's up 16-15. USF has 2 timeouts. Now, on the first play, Florida ends up passing. And while I won't say that Billy Napier is totally excused there, this was a run that had a pass tagged on it. The RPO action, there was an easy access throw, and DJ Lagway decides to pull it and throw it. That ball dies at the receiver's feet. So now it's 2nd down, and USF hasn't had to burn one of those timeouts. Florida, the next play, calls a run. That ends up going and not very far. USF has to burn 1 timeout. And then on 3rd down, they throw a slot fade that falls incomplete. And so now you have USF walking into that final drive with one of their timeouts in their pocket. You get the 2 penalties on top of it, and the rest of it's history. So all that's to say, maybe you can blame Billy Napier for having a play that had that tag on it at all for DJ as an option. But quarterback made a decision to throw that one out while the rest of the line blocked what looked like to me. And again, I'm not in everyone's playbook, but as someone that was a former offensive lineman can usually tell the difference between a play that's a designed pass and a play that's got designed run elements to it. There was an option there, and unfortunately your quarterback took the one that didn't at least force USF to use one of its timeouts. So getting some questions in the chat here as we look at this game. Obviously, all the talk is going to be doom and gloom for Florida. As far as USF and do we believe they're legit? Absolutely. I think right now at the top of the list for the group of 6 potential entries into the college football playoff has to be USF number 1, and then we'll talk about UNLV later on in the show for Dan Mullen and that crew. Byron Brown in this game, 23 of 36 for 263 and a touch through the air, 17 carries for 66 yards on the ground. Tell you what, big, impressive athlete. I thought it showed up really well in the first couple of weeks as they upset Boise State, who was last year's Group of 6 representative for the college football playoff in week 1. And now this one here. We'll see if South Florida can keep it going right now. Miami coming up on the road next week, going to be the final boss of these challenges. But even if they go down there, this is sort of the same formula we watched Boise State go with last year, where, hey, you already made the splash and got the flashy Power 5 win. Even if this ends up being a game where, let's say they keep it close and competitive, would still lose, a la Boise State on the road facing Oregon last year, we've seen how favorably the committee looks on that for opponents in the Group of 6. So really impressed by their start to the season. On the other side for Florida, though, you've got one of the best quarterback talents in the sport. That offense was never able to find any sort of vertical threat. And to the point in the chat right now, I saw Golden X. Florida's schedule is going to make hope really hard to come by. I don't want to do too much of the read the schedule game. But dear God, the upcoming weeks. Next week, on the road at LSU. This week, I should say, on the road at LSU for a night game in Death Valley on ABC. After that, on the road at Miami. Home versus Texas. On the road at Texas A&M. Home versus a Mississippi State team that just beat Arizona State in the waning moments of that game after a 2-10 campaign last season. So it's not great right now. Florida, who had to start last year getting embarrassed at the hands of Miami in that game we all remember as one of the Cam Ward kickoff parties in South Beach, where they're over there trying to woo Florida recruits on the sideline who are there for that game. Again, I feel for Billy Napier because he seems really well-intended, but right now this is a situation that if you're not careful and that locker room fractures, could really spiral this season, because once again, they've got one of the SEC's toughest schedules and certainly one of college football's toughest schedules week in and week out. So a brutal loss there, a great moment for USF as they continue to march forward in this season. Let's talk a little bit about some of the rest of the sport here. This is also a weekend defined a bit by blown leads that we saw. 2 in particular, SMU against Baylor, big time out of conference clash for both these teams. Good bounce back win for Baylor, who gets a win in double overtime, but SMU blows a late 2-score lead in that game that certainly stings. And then the one I mentioned, Arizona State on the road in Starkville. We get all the videos all week of them flashing the cowbells around in a way that many people pointed out wasn't really going to help you. 1 or 2 of those when you prepare to go down there. I've called a game in Starkville. That's got to be hell for sideline reporters who hear that all game long. Really difficult one there. But the ending of this game, so Mississippi State ends up getting outscored 20-0 down the home stretch in this game. Arizona State climbs all the way back. They go on a 17-play drive with 1 run mixed in and get held to a field goal. And then here, to me, I'm very curious what the explanation of this is going to be from Kenny Dillingham and this staff for why you go man-to-man coverage with a player, and Brennan Thompson, who's one of the fastest in the sport. We heard about it all broadcast. Gets a one-on-one matchup. They're able to take the deep shot, and the rest is history in this case. You feel so much for Arizona State, who drops completely out of the top 25 rankings after sitting at 12 last week. You're defending Big 12 champions, college football playoff participant, that incredible game with Texas last year in the CFP that really had this program that I think Kenny Dillingham's done a great job with. He is, to me, as a coach, is one of the voices in college football that really seems to understand where the sport's going in terms of how to navigate the portal, how to operate when you're not one of the schools with an infinite budget the way we see at the top of the sport. This is going to be a really hard one potentially to come back through. But I do think we still saw enough good in that comeback. You got down early in a tough road environment. Your great quarterback in Sam Levitt and your wide receiver Jordan Tyson, not the reason totally that you get back into this one. That ground game that they were able to lean on during that drive and late in this game end up becoming the difference. So we'll see how they respond coming back home this week. They have Texas State coming up, a team that gave them a really tough game last year. G.J. Kinney and that bunch, who's a name that's always going to mean something to me, as the quarterback that took us down when he was at Tulsa and I was at Notre Dame back in 2010. but a big-time gut check moment for the Sun Devils at a point in their season where there's still plenty to play for. The Big 12 is wide open right now. Iowa State's handled their business early in the season. Kansas State, maybe not as much. You've got Utah and Texas Tech all in the mix as well. And you see the beauty of the Big 12. We're going to see all that chaos play out. This is a conference where TCU, Josh Hoover and company sent a message on that Monday night matchup with Bill Belichick in North Carolina in week 1. Baylor bounced back in a big way. So there is plenty out there for the Sun Devils still if they want to play for it. But and that one out of conference, so it doesn't hurt them in the Big 12 standings by any means. But this is a conference that, like some of the others that aren't the SEC and the Big 10, you're fighting for your place in the sport each and every week in those out of conference matchups. And while I think things are going to be different this year for Mississippi State and Jeff Lebby, that's a 2-10 team coming off, a 2-10 team from last season trying to right the ship. So we'll wait and see how that looks going forward here. But again, big-time blown leads there. I do think Arizona has a good chance to come back from that. They have, though, a tough slate on the road at Baylor in that slate we showed you, on the road at Utah, and on the road at Iowa State. So really difficult there. SMU, on the other hand, when you look in the ACC this year, they're at Clemson and they host Miami. So they've got both of those in the mix here, too, for Rhett Lashley's bunch. That's a tough road to go for both of them. I probably would lean Arizona State, but man, having to go on the road to especially Utah and Iowa State, that's really, really tough in my mind. And kind of emblematic of the wild weekend overall that we had in the Big 12. This conference is, again, maybe I'm a little biased because I cover it for TNT this year and I'm going to spend more time in this conference than I have in a while. The depth of talent in this group is undeniable. So you look at this weekend, Kansas State loses a tough one to Army. And I know Chris Kleiman's getting beat up a lot right now, saying this is kind of a weird game. He still has confidence in this team. As someone that played the service academies regularly at Notre Dame, it is a weird game. It is so atypical. You spend a week throwing out everything you know about game planning for a normal offense and opposition in favor of one in Army that can come in and do what they do, dominating time of possession the way that they did. Iowa and Iowa State went for the Cyhawk this weekend. Iowa State holds on in a tradition unlike any other. Iowa and Iowa State playing to the under in this game. I think Rocco Becht and Iowa State absolutely for real. This offense absorbing the loss of 2 NFL wide receivers in Jalen Nolan, Jaden Higgins, but still a deep tight end room that we see them make use of. Matt Campbell and that offense have always been incredibly diverse in what they present opposing defenses. And John Heacock and that defense on the other side, one of the standard bearers in the Big 12. So I absolutely think they've got a chance to be the Big 12 champion this season in a way they're always kind of in the mix on and coming off a really good season last year. But I think this was another big moment for them, coming off of the standalone game in Ireland to start the season where everyone got the taste of that. Rocco Becht, probably one of the more underrated quarterbacks nationally in terms of his poise, how he can play point guard for these offenses, and what he offers you as a run threat. Absolutely a plus runner there. But the one that's going to be really interesting, guys, and I just came back from Lubbock. I called their game against Kent State where, listen, the first 2 weeks of the season, Texas Tech has been playing a different sport than the opponents that they have faced. But they've handled their business. Arkansas, Pine Bluff, and Kent State had no business competing with Texas Tech, and that was reflected on the field. It was 48-0 at halftime this last week. Seeing that team up close and personal. Baron Morton, another returning starter in the Big 12, someone who's dealt with injuries, had shoulder surgery this last December and is finally healthy now, gets a new offensive coordinator in Mac Leftwich, who comes over from Texas State and has a lot to play with. There's a tight end room with a bunch of talent here. There's an offensive line with some high-prized recruits from the transfer portal that still, I think, needs some time to gel. But y'all, that defense. And I'm just going to tell you right now, couple weeks when Utah and Texas Tech get set to play, cancel the rest of your plans, move some things around in your day, and get ready to watch this matchup inside the trenches. Going to be it'll be the first one that NFL scouts put on when you see the offensive tackle tandem for Utah, two of the best in the sport, an offensive line that's traditionally always on the Joe Moore Award radar for the best offensive line in the sport, and this defensive front for Texas Tech. So 4 across, You've got Hunter Lee, the transfer defensive tackle from UCF, Skylar Gill-Howard, the transfer defensive tackle from Northern Illinois, who scored a touchdown on an interception that I got to call, which is a career-defining moment, a thick six from the big fella. Incredible to watch. And then on the ends, David Bailey, the Stanford transfer, who pound for pound might be one of the best athletes in college football. NFL scouts fascinated by this guy, tantalizing ability when he's dialed in, almost unblockable. And on the other side, Romello Height, the transfer from Georgia Tech, who might fly under the radar with the rest of that group. I think one of the most impressive athletes I've ever seen in person. We got a chance to meet with him. Long, rangy, reminds me a lot of Leonard Floyd in the NFL in terms of that wingspan, his fluidity, how quick he is at the point of attack. That's a guy that really seems to be taking the next step with his game this year and is going to get a chance to test that against some of the best competition there is. So this weekend of Big 12 upheaval, I think, is going to give way to some really incredible matchups. I mean, Kansas lost a barn burner to Missouri in a border war game that came back for the first time in years. That was incredibly entertaining. Missouri takes a big lead at the end after a turnover or whatever it was. But I think Kansas with a healthy Jalen Daniels is a live dog this year. I think, as we mentioned, Utah, Texas Tech, Devin Dampier. If you don't know, you're going to learn soon. One of the most impactful quarterbacks. Hofflax comes in. I joined Texas Tech and Utah Line Talk. I have found a home. Yeah, I promise you're always going to find beef on the menu on Mondays here as we react to college football on Bleacher Report. I can assure you that. So, again, it's hard not to get excited looking down the road at that matchup, but there's a lot to really like there. Texas Tech continues to handle their business. Their challenges will begin in Big 12 play, and we'll learn. That's part of the difficulty right now. We're seeing a different version of the sport and different strategies from everyone involved. We've seen some teams go in on these big P4 on P4 matchups where you're great on great to start the season. You may not fully know who you are, but you get to learn and stress test a lot more of the mechanisms than maybe a Texas Tech who, all of a sudden, when they play teams that are more in their tax bracket in terms of talent, are things necessarily going to look the same? I tend to think defensively, absolutely. Offensively, we'll see if that group up front can gel and give them a chance against some of these great defenses you're going to see in conference. All right. Wouldn't be Monday if we didn't do a little bit of overreaction. So let's get to it right now. Overreaction or nah around college football? And the first name on everyone's mind is always going to be Arch Manning. Has Arch Manning arrived? Overreaction or not? I'd probably say overreaction. But to be fair, I think what we did last week going into his first start against Ohio State was also an overreaction. The kid's not terrible, and he's not great right now. He's a good college quarterback who's going to get a chance to find himself in the upcoming weeks. San Jose State, a nice palate cleanser after what happened with Ohio State. It's no disrespect to them as a program, but Arch, 19 of 30, 295 yards, 4 touchdowns through the air, a rushing touchdown in this game, 1 interception, and still a guy who looked like at times he was overthinking things, but you saw more of those moments in this game where used the athleticism, took the throws that Sark created for him in the offense, a bunch of good wide open throws at the beginning of this game. I don't think this is all of a sudden, okay, everything's fixed from what we saw in week 1. But I do think, especially for a young quarterback, having a game like this where you can go out and get some confidence after a week 1 where everybody was talking about him and everyone was focused on what he didn't do and the mistakes he made and the opponent he went against. I think this is really important for him. So I'll go overreaction on that, but I think it's fine. Like leaving Arch alone for a little bit and letting him bake, probably the best for all parties involved. I think what we saw is improvement from Arch this week, and that's all you can ask from a young player at this stage of the game. All right, overreaction or no overreaction. Michigan needs to unleash Bryce Underwood. So we saw in the game this weekend against Oklahoma a lot of what we saw in week 1 for these young quarterbacks. Young guys going on the road to hostile environments and mature defenses had a tough time. Bryce Underwood, 9 of 24 in this game. And unleashing Bryce Underwood will require that has an outlet. Like, I think what we saw from Michigan on the road against Oklahoma, and credit to Brent Venables and company. John Mateer is awesome. I think I saw someone on Twitter say John Mateer has the best plot armor of any college quarterback, and I can't see it any differently after that. He had a touchdown in the air, 2 on the ground in this game. He's an electric runner. It's what he was at Washington State. It's what he is now. The passing attack is continuing to develop along with that offensive line. But the defense, that defense was online last year. That looked like Brent stuff. And more so this year. The Death Star is loading up. What we saw at Clemson for years has now migrated its way to Norman. And that was going to be a lot for a young quarterback, let alone one that Doesn't seem like it. And I think Michigan's play calling reflects the fact that they don't have a lot of confidence in that wide receiver room right now. I get they added a bunch more scholarship players than they had last year. But Michigan, when they were winning in their best days under Jim Harbaugh, wasn't defined by that position. And right now, I don't think they are either. So unleashing Bryce Underwood, like maybe you get him more involved in the QB run game and get him a few more opportunities there. But as far as unleashing him as a downfield passer, I don't know if they've got the horses to make that run or not right now. So I'll say overreaction on that as well. On the other side, overreaction or not, Oklahoma's the real deal. I'll say yes on this. I'm buying John Mateer again, 270 yards through the air, 74 on the ground, led the team in rushing against Michigan, and that one pass touchdown to go along with 2 on the ground. I don't know if we're going to see a Cam Ward turn for John Mateer necessarily. Again, Cam Ward transferred from Washington State to Miami, became the number 1 overall pick. I don't know if that's in John Mateer's future necessarily. I think his first inclination is still to run more than it is to pass. And they used him in the design run game. He is an electric athlete. Like him one-on-one with someone coming from the second, third level, good night. Going to erase that angle every time. But that being said, I still think that quarterback run game, them being better on the ground, along with what that defense already has been doing for a year now, yeah, I'm buying what Oklahoma's selling, no question. All right, here we go. Clemson, is it time to panic for Clemson? Yeah, I'm a little worried. I'm a little worried. Like, it should not have looked as difficult as it did against Troy. And Troy's perennially been one of those programs that's been a thorn in a lot of people's side. But with the amount of talent on this Clemson roster, the amount of continuity on offense, it shouldn't look this hard right now. I get you had to replace it running back in a way that you weren't equipped to right off the way. But defensively, with all those top 5, top 15 draft picks that we talk about on the other side of the ball, it shouldn't look like this. So I'm a little worried, and especially with how good Miami looked against Notre Dame in week 1, how good Florida State's looked the first couple of weeks of the season. Like, you don't want to slip up if you're Clemson right now in Dabo. He's defied the odds and defied public sentiment for a long time now in terms of those of us like myself that questioned his methods as the sport changed around him. Cade Klubnik has progressed every year, didn't come in and light the world on fire the way some of the previous quarterback prospects were there, but something's got to give for this team soon. Maybe this is a wake-up call and all that talent finds its way online soon, but I think people expected a lot more from them sooner. LSU, listen, they came back down a little bit and played down to the level of their competition week 2. That can happen sometimes, but I think we're seeing around the sport, the upper crust of the sport, you're kind of expected to put some distance between you and the teams in the group of 6 and beyond, and Clemson certainly didn't do that right now. So I'm going to say not an overreaction. I'm a little worried right now, but full-blown panic, I'll save that for another day. Last one here, the Nico Iamaleava redemption tour is dead. Yeah, no, I'm going to stick a fork in that one. And it's not all his fault that UCLA defense right now can't do much about anything through the last couple of weeks. UNLV also a team that we mentioned off the top of the show, along with USF, going to be the 2 teams that I think most talked about. And UNLV was one of the favorites to win the Mountain West coming into this season and has done nothing but back that up now. Scared everyone week 0. That Idaho State game I saw gave up a lot of points. Obviously on the road, Sam Houston put up a bunch of points too. But getting that 30-23 win against UCLA, the kind of Power 5 win you need if you're going to be the group of 6 team representing there. Calandria, the quarterback transfer from Virginia, I think is the guy there. I know they had him and Alex Orji both kind of going back and forth as the quarterback competition there. I think this is Calandria's team. But for Nico on the other side, 29-41, 255 yards and a touchdown. Between that and couple that with their opening week loss against Utah, I don't think he is consistent enough at the helm of that offense. You see the talent shine its way through at times still. He's a talented player. He's a former 5-star. All that stuff still shows up at times. Not nearly consistent enough, and you need him to go out and basically be last year's Cam Ward if you're going to want this UCLA team to succeed. Because on the other side, I don't trust that defense to stop much based on what I've seen through the first couple of weeks here. So I will say not an overreaction there. I always think this is going to be a complicated eval. It doesn't help that on the other side, Tennessee has had success with that quarterback wife swap, but this is going to be one of those cautionary tales that I think people talk about for a while in the portal era of maybe overplaying your hand or misreading the marketplace, however you want to react to that one. So not an overreaction there, I think, by any means. Reaction, though. Let's look at the top 25 poll for this week. New poll dropped today as we take a look right now in the top 25. Not much change up top. Ohio State, Penn State, LSU still 1, 2, and 3. Oregon jumps up 2 spots to number 4 ahead of Miami, who checks in to round out the top 5. And then you got Georgia, Texas, Notre Dame, who was on a bye in week 2. Illinois at number 9. And Florida State now cracking the top 10 here. Some other noticeable movement here. Clemson drops down 4 spots after that win over Troy. I know it feels like they lost the way we talk about it. They did pull back and win that game. Florida completely out of the mix now. Arizona State drops out of the top 25. They're the next closest in receiving votes. Missouri hanging tight now at number 25. They break in after being unranked, as does Auburn as well. Alabama moves up to 29. Michigan falls 8 spots down to number 23. So all about what you'd expect here. I think Florida State's rise to the top 10 is good. For as much as people bemoan the preseason polls and how they're a vehicle for TV to create matchup hype and all that stuff, the AP has at least gone and rectified a lot of these errors early. Alabama sitting down at 19 now, absolutely where they belong after a lackluster opening against Florida State. And Florida State, who started the season outside of the top 25, now moving up to number 10, absolutely where they belong alongside an Illinois team that is a pretty dangerous out, and one that, as we look at this one, Oregon, by the way, I guess I should say a kind word about them. Dan Lanning and company plucked the wings off Oklahoma State. Lots of banter about NIL during the week leading up from Mike Gundy, the Oklahoma State head coach. Dan Lanning, his quarterback, Dante Moore, all clearly took that personally. They're no stranger to finding an edge. He's a Kirby Smart disciple. Like, he comes from that tree where they're going to hunt the edge, even as a team that is not an underdog or doubted by any means. And that was sort of the central thesis of this week. So they've handled business. They probably deserve a lot more conversation near the top of the sport, even after last year where they get dropped as the 1 seed in that first game by Ohio State. Miami, right where they belong. Georgia, right where they belong. Texas, all these programs looking consistent. Notre Dame's going to be the one. They got to answer the bell this week. Texas A&M coming to South Bend. They get the bye week in between games 1 and 2. Remains to see if that'll help or hurt the Irish. Georgia dropping 2 spots. I'm not worried about right now. That'll work itself out in conference. People might beef with Michigan still being ranked. I think you went on the road with a freshman quarterback and kept it pretty close. I'm not super mad at that. Or Oklahoma at number 13. So the ones to keep an eye on, though, and I think this is where we'll leave you off here. Teams to watch out for as we look down the home stretch of the season. Well, home stretch of the season, just getting started in the season. What the hell am I talking about? Teams to watch out for through the early season. We've mentioned a couple of them already, but I want to highlight them here. Illinois coming off this weekend. Good win on the road at Duke. Tons of turnovers from Duke in this game. Darian Mensah, super talented quarterback transfer from Tulane they got over there. They just couldn't hold on to the football. So Luke Altmaier and company get another win there. Good to see that rolling for a team that returned as much production as anyone in the country. All their offensive linemen and a quarterback who was incredibly productive. Brett Bielema been building the machine on both sides of the ball. A lot of people think this defense has a chance to be really good again this season. I also think Georgia Tech, really interesting one. The win against Colorado week 1 was certainly going to get a lot of the notice there. But I look at Georgia Tech and what they have upcoming right now. They host Clemson next week. And this year, no Miami or SMU on the schedule in conference. So until they get to that Georgia game at the end of the season, they got a good run against a lot of teams that they can beat. And so we've seen Clemson vulnerable. And man, I don't want to be vulnerable against a team that's got Jamal Haynes and Haynes King in the backfield and that much speed on offense. I get it's largely a spread option attack right now without as much downfield passing attack as you'd want. But that's a well-coached football team that knows who they are identity-wise, and I think that's dangerous where Clemson sits right now. And even if you can't steal that one, again, the rest of the schedule lines up really well. Do I think have you in the mix? Illinois certainly in there. And then we mentioned UNLV already. They're going to be involved in that. Dan Mullen, year 1. A lot to be excited about with the way they play offense. But the biggest one, man, is Utah. Like, they're still sitting in the back end of the top 25 at 20. That matchup against Texas Tech looming pretty large in the next couple of weeks. They got Wyoming on the road this week, a trip to Laramie. You don't want to sleep on that one. But then Texas Tech at home on September 20th as they get into Big 12 conference play. To me, that game's going to tell us everything we need to know about the top end of this conference, because I think talent-wise, these two teams have the best chance to be at the upper echelon of this. Kyle Whittingham's been the poster of consistency, but man, Joey McGuire, hearing the way players talk about that coach gives me a lot of confidence in what they're building there. We know all about the investment that school's made in the facilities there that they just opened in this last year, in the roster that has the number one transfer portal according to On3 this offseason. I think that's one of those matchups that's going to tell us a lot about the remainder of the season here. But Utah, again, offensive line, adding Devin Dampier and Jason Beck as offensive coordinator from Mexico. They both come over from New Mexico for some continuity there. I think it's a dangerous, dangerous football team nationally, not just in the Big 12, that's still kind of creeping in the wings right now after their first couple of wins on the road at UCLA and then against Cal Poly this last week. So plenty of fun stuff to keep an eye on. We are just getting started, only through week 2 of college football, but still plenty of great reaction at this point. Excited to see what we have coming up this next week. Thank you to everyone who stopped in, checked this out. We always appreciate the comments in the chat. We'll be sure to take more questions as we get going through this next time. Always follow along at Bleacher Report. Make sure you hit the bell over there. Plenty of great content coming all college football season. Plenty of behind-the-scenes stuff that you can take a look at as well as part of the coverage with TNT of the Big 12. Very much excited to be a part of that. Again, I'll be at Arizona State for their matchup against Texas State this weekend that you can check out there at Mike Golick Jr. on Twitter, like the man says, down at the bottom of the screen. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll talk to you here again next week.